All right, and we get into that beautiful moment where the show has begun. Hey there, everyone. My name is Ryan Mancini, and I am joined today, as always, with
Sebastian Shug.
And just to tell you a little bit about what you're going to be listening to today, and hopefully for the next several weeks, and hopefully well beyond that, too.
Definitely.
This is the show Mars on Life. Now, you're probably thinking, what does Mars on Life mean? Well, it's just thinking. That's what it's all about. We're thinking. We're two guys that want to give our commentary on just about anything you can think of, while also giving a platform and a space for artists to form their own kind of collective. You can add yourself into
of course.
that.
No, I thought that was a great introduction. So, like I said, Sebastian Shug, soon-to-be college graduate and former, should I say current midlife crisis. So
You and me both, sister.
in terms of Mars on Life, what we decided to do was establish a sort of free-flowing potpourri of artistic sense and nature in the aspects of film, politics, music, etc. So I feel like given both of our backgrounds, both collegiately, fraternally, as well as more so just educationally, because I mean we both come from very different but very similar disciplines. You know, I believe I met you when you were junior in college, senior.
I think so. I think it was my senior year, my graduating year, yeah.
So, you know, from both a communication studies and journalism standpoint alike, we definitely have our fair share of opinions regarding the subjects. So, if you'd like to get started, let's...
Yeah, well, I guess a little bit about myself as well. I mean, Sebastian and I, we met up several years ago at California State University Northridge. That's the school that you're still at, and I am no longer a student of. I have since graduated. I graduated with a major in journalism and a minor in political science, so I kind of have a background in... It's one of those weird things where here I am on radio, and yet my emphasis on and off was print. And the reason why I say on and off is just simply because they would change it from emphasis to general to emphasis to general, so that's part of the reason why I technically...
Yeah, no.
I went in general, I went through print, and I left, I think, general, so...
And here you are, holding a microphone in your face.
Exactly.
You know,
I mean, that's what 25 does to you.
I mean, it's definitely more of a heightened discipline than what I have. Communications is just speaking, and it's about you do what you want to do with it. So
I mean, I know communications majors that are afraid of talking, so
it's so ironic because if you don't, that's it. You tank the class.
And I was the loudest person in the comms classes, and yet I was the one that, my profession, you're not supposed to hear my voice. So there you go.
And sort of the ironic twist is just to give a little bit more background about myself, I'm actually a freelance publisher. So I spend the majority of my time in print, whether it be digitally or physically. So I can kind of see where you're coming from in terms of, you know, that stance on paper. A lot of people see it, and hopefully someone will eventually pay for it. So... you know, again, here we are.
Yeah, and I think, too, it's largely just about trying to give ourselves a new creative platform in order to get our message across, because just to let you know where exactly we are, that's classified. But on top of that, we are two people that grew up in and around Los Angeles, and it's a very difficult area when it comes to obviously getting any kind of name recognition, or even when it comes down to something as simple as publishing. Right. Granted, a lot of the publishing is in New York City, but I'm talking about if you're a self-starter, if you're a journalist, this is a region that's notoriously known as a news desert in the journalism industry, so that's why this is a very tricky area and a very wide market to hop into.
Well, I was going to say, you know, wide market, though, albeit very oversaturated. You know,
yeah,
which is, you know, unfortunate for people in our field, because that's exactly what we're best at, what we want to strive in. Though finding work, you know, finding that, well, not so much finding work, well, even though that is important, finding that representation to showcase your work, that's something that we both on and off in class and out of class struggled with. And now sort of just having this, not so much air, but epiphany of what if we started that sort of platform in order to showcase those not misinterpreted, but more so underutilized artistic individuals.
Yeah.
More so the people that don't get seen on college campuses that you may see wandering in the halls, you may see, well, at least in my department, you see a bunch of flyers and posters and things of that nature. It really is a lot of, I don't want to say shameless self-promoting, but it is self-promoting, if I'm being honest.
Oh, yeah. You got to be your own salesman.
You do have to be your own salesman, which I do appreciate. And my God, have I been down that trek. I'm still down that trek. Let's be serious.
And it's also just about, that's, I think, the beauty of what we're going to do with our show is it's going to go well beyond just, I almost gave away where we are. It's going to go well beyond the people that we may have met with along the path. It's going to go far beyond that. It's going to go, we're going to have people on the show that we've probably not met before, we'll probably have correspondence with. And if anything, we understand that there's a lot of talent out there and a lot of great people out there that not only do they bring their own unique taste to the arts, whether that's books, film, writing like journalism, or even just anything that you would see like in an art gallery. We also know that there's a lot of people out there that are doing a lot of good that pertains to our society as it stands. And I think that's something that we want to showcase as two people that have been, as Bain would say,
which quote?
There's
God. So many memorable ones.
We adapted the darkness, you see, and we were molded by it.
Born in it.
My Bain impersonation is actually better than that, but we want to make sure that we're finding the right people that can address the times that we're in, but not feel as though they're being completely wrecked by it, for the lack of a better term.
I want to say not exactly wrecked by it, but as you quite eloquently put it, adaptive to it, and more so adapting to what someone's learning now and what someone has already learned, taking from one's past, inundating that into, let's say, future experiences, talents, and expertise. So I guess until that point, we should go over our first topic.
Well, and I think, too, that's actually a phenomenal segue, because that basically addresses kind of something I was gonna mention it generally, just because I know, and I was gonna prep you on this, and I know I didn't, and I apologize. But
no worries.
The show's also about finding that right kind of representation as well. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's something that I know the Oscars had some ups and downs in trying to address that very recently. But at the same time, it's something that even in the publishing industry, it's plaguing a lot of great works of art that are coming out, and I basically mean books. I know that, and I don't know if you've heard about the American Dirt controversy.
I have not, actually.
Oh, interesting.
Which is, surprising, considering I'd usually be up to date, especially with news regarding a pilot. Though, you kind of sprung this one on me, so. Feel free to start. I'll chime right in.
Very generally, I mean, and this is something that I hope we don't do, and I hope it's, if anything, a situation like this is, not to sound cliche, but it's opened a lot of people's eyes to content out there that is more representative of the specific issue that American Dirt touches on, which is about immigration and people coming across the border. And the book has generated a lot of controversy in terms of the fact that the author herself she has some, I think she has ancestry that does originates from, I think, Puerto Rico.
Okay.
But she's basically a white author talking about putting a face to the faceless and trying to
just sort of like pick out amongst the crowd in a way.
Well, she's trying to write a book that has been received as being the grapes of wrath of our time.
Well, that's a tall order.
And that's because the book...
Wait, is she? Well, I'm sorry to interrupt. She's being criticized because she holds herself in this high regard of it's going to be the next Grapes of Wrath, or
Well, other people have reacted to that.
okay.
And there's been a lot of controversy in terms of
So
how
it's
much
not-
she
so-
was paid, and
Okay.
like she was paid like 6 or 7 figures.
So it's not an ego issue, or it is an ego issue?
Well, it's a combination of the publishing industry having issues with, not having issues with, but promoting authors and works of art that aren't necessarily reflective in a very healthy or positive way. They, like a lot of the art, a lot of the discourse on social media has basically said that this book has really bastardized a lot of the discussion around people that, want to come to the United States for better lives for themselves, for their children, for the rest of their families.
Okay.
And the thing is that there's people that are wondering maybe she didn't do enough research. There have been...
Like anti-immigration? Like people are like assuming she's taking an anti-immigration stance?
Well, I guess the best way to summarize it is given the positive feedback that it's gotten from more kind of renowned praisers,
Okay.
if that's even a word, it's basically like it's this great white hope when
Right.
there's already people of color writing these kinds of stories about immigrants that are either based in reality or they're just straight up journalism that are already doing an amazing job, but they don't get any kind of recognition. And yet her book is on Oprah's book club. It became Oprah's book club for 2020.
Ah, okay.
And I think Barnes & Noble, they've been heavily promoting it as well.
It's how it goes.
And so it's just kind of, if anything, that whole situation, which, I'll definitely share more info with you afterwards, it's something in which I've looked at that and I've thought that's definitely what I don't want to do with this show.
No, of course. I mean, speaking from personal perspective in my line of work, when it comes to publishing certain material, there is an intent, obviously. And I'm not talking about like an intent of, I'm not just talking about an intent of, what's the genre? Because obviously that's how you're going to market your book. But more so of the writer's voice, the narrator's voice. And I'm not, because I'm only seeing this at face value, of course I need to do more research it myself. However, I have to ask, compared to other works of this nature, I'd like to actually like kind of preface my own opinion, then ask you the same question. Do you think that it's like, intended as like slander, whereas it's misrepresenting XYZ, for the sake of it, to make a statement where it's, it's brash, it's unapologetic, and that's why, it's like, it's critically acclaimed.
Initially, I was going to say...
And is that a good thing?
Well, initially I was going to say neither, but the second one, you're kind of closer to what the discourse has kind of shown it to be, where there have been some other authors that are curious as to whether or not there may have been some plagiarism done.
Oh, okay.
In regards to their own work. I know that NPR did a phenomenal episode of it where they interviewed several authors that have had some kind of involvement with the book, including the author herself. But the idea is that it's almost like it's being pushed up as being this big epic that touches on the humanitarian crisis of our time, but it's coming out of the perspective of people that are reading it and not fully getting the authenticity of the people that this book is said to, if you were to take the characters and treat them like real people, the culture that's reflected in the book does not necessarily reflect the culture of the real people. And she's also said things within the book, I believe in the author's note, that are very controversial in terms of a face browner than mine writing it and things like that. And the problem is, again, there's a lot of people of color that are writing about this issue. I've had the great chance to finish reading Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli, and like and this is going to be an issue that we'll talk at length probably from now until the end of time about literature itself, is the fact that, in an oversaturated market, how is your book going to stand out?
And see, that's the thing. Like, if you're intending it to be this great work that is going to be, publicly criticized, which, to be fair, does have its strengths, especially my specialty is actually in satire, and more so the dark humor. That's not to say that I specialize in it fully. I've had my range of children's books to coffee table books to what can be construed as pamphlets.
What about a coffee table book about coffee tables?
That's subjective photography.
Well, I don't know about that, Jerry.
But what I mean is that, work that's intentionally satirical in a dark, humorous nature, or more so the element of not so much surprise, but shock value, Granted, that is a very one-note way of causing an uproar, but it does work.
Well, the other factor with the uproar around American Dirt, and I have some info in front of me to kind of help us out here. I'm a journalist, damn it. Janine Cummins is the author. She's written other books as well. But some of the controversy with the book has been circled around the graphic violence, the fact that she uses Spanish and a lot of different phrases in ways that would not be used by Spanish speakers. And on top of that,
I mean, I can understand taking liberties in terms of these are real life events. This is what happens, and it's not always pretty, right?
But in this case, it's supposed to be strictly a novel.
Exactly.
And it reads like a very graphic crime novel. And so at the end of the day, a lot of people have reacted to it with hashtags and basically saying that some of the early reviews for it, especially from, there was one author, her name is Miriam Gerba. She wrote, and if I'm butchering her name, I apologize, but she wrote an excellent review about it. And she's gone through so much crap on Twitter with people saying, who are you to say, whether or not this is a good book or a bad book? Mm-hmm. And so the interesting thing is that the publisher decided to withdraw the book tour for American Dirt. And some of the claims that have been made is that, we've received our own kind of threats from people that are unhappy with the book. Now, so far, there's been, to my knowledge, no proof of any threats towards the publisher, but there's been threats towards the people criticizing the book.
Oh, so people in support then? Like vehement support?
Yeah. People that they look at the book and they literally put it on a pedestal when they don't understand the culture or the context beyond just kind of a whitewashed interpretation of the issue. Right. And I think that's something that, I know a lot of people, journalists I know, who are trying to who want to elevate people of color that have done amazing works of fiction and even works of journalism, put together in a book. They've done an amazing job at trying to elevate those authors. Somebody actually made a canvas painting of a bunch of those books, including Lost Children Archive. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's something that, looking ahead, is certainly something we don't want to repeat. Authenticity is key, but at the same time, we look at publishing and we look at books and we kind of think, wow, there's a crisis going on, and this is unfathomable. And I say that too as somebody that, I, as a poli-sci minor, and this, you've seen me, I love reading my political books. I may have finally read the final political book because everything either gets so repetitive or you're thinking to yourself, what have I actually learned?
Personal question. Yeah. Are you ever going to get sick of them?
Oh, I have.
Yeah. No, but more so to the point of, are you finally Are you well? Now that you've answered my question, are you finally sick of them to the point of exploring new genres? Because I know that's kind of your niche, right? And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not at all a slight to remain active in the political discourse of the world.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, and for me,
hearing you now versus hearing you about 3 years ago, so wrapped up in Gore Vidal.
Well, no, here's the thing. Some of my favorite authors, I will go back and read their stuff, but that's because that's writing that was from a different time, whether it's about, authors, if it's Hunter S. Thompson writing about the 1972 election, if it's Gore Vidal writing about Aaron Burr, that's a novel. Great novel. If it's about any of these authors of a certain time, I will keep reading from them.
Right.
But the industry now, it's kind of like, how many more books can come out saying the same things about Donald Trump?
I mean,
it only took us 21 minutes to mention his name, but
at that point, that's when you decide, when you stop reading. And it looks like you're sort of slowing down. Of course you're not going to just let go of the concept fully of, I'm going to stop reading political material.
Well,
that's of course your interest.
And I think too that's the danger we're now in with politics in general too, is just the fact that, and granted, like, I've had these revelations for the last couple of months between my two passions in life, Star Wars and politics, which is the more and more you kind of get away from the root reasons why you liked it in the first place, the more and more you just kind of get dissatisfied with everything that comes out subsequently.
Is that why I can't stand the prequels?
Well, I'll put it.
Is that the proper justification?
I mean, at this rate, episode 3 is looking better and better after episode 9. But
But
as Maz Kanata said, that's a good question for another time. But yeah, because a lot of the books that I have read, it's about trying to build up my knowledge of history and politics and how they blend together. But in recent years, I mean, obviously having a controversial, which is a total understatement. I almost swore. It's an understatement to say, having a controversial president, how much further can you go from that? Mm-hmm. And I think that's where you start to realize, well, it's easy. It's about getting people out to go out and vote and changing that. Mm-hmm. That's the only way you can actually change things. Otherwise, you're just repeating. And this is something that I know other podcasters that I've listened to, they say the same thing, that in politics, nothing ever really changes. When you have an like 2016, there were people saying, there's a Bush and a Clinton running for president, and a Jurassic Park movie is number 1 at the box office. And then you would get a little meme of Robin Williams from Jumanji saying, what year is it? And that's because that's what was basically happening all those years ago. So
cats and dogs
living together, mass hysteria. And so I think that's the trouble I've run into. And granted, and not to pontificate further on this, but I'll kind of wrap up this point, which is in terms of like my own reading, I fell out of a love of reading. I grew up obsessed with reading. I'd read like 5 books at once. I was a nutcase about it. And then sophomore year of high school, which was the worst year of high school at the place that I went to for high school, totally turned me off. And it wasn't until first I got slowly back into fiction, and it was the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo trilogy. And that was also part of the reason that kind of drove me towards the journalism path to some degree.
Right.
I've only admitted that to very few people.
Well, now there's a whole audience.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for giving me that chance, audience. I'd like to thank the Academy. No. But there's that, and then on top of that, I kind of had a developing philosophy on just kind of the world and, creation, and, I never grew up religious. I'm not religious. So I kind of had a moment to think like, okay, I want to start like going down a path of just learning and understanding space, time, reality, and all that jazz. And, it started off with, I was in my senior year of high school, and I read A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. Nice. And it just kept going from there. And it's been everything from politics to more history to, the social conquest of Earth, like all these different Jerry Seinfeld's comedy book, like it became eclectic, but at the heart of it was still politics and history. And I realized once I hit that point where I realized the overwhelming majority of my favorite authors were dead, and I realized my favorite author, who's Ta-Nehisi Coates, there's no one else like him today. Mm-hmm. Frankly, it's a writing style that just clicks in my mind the same way a lot of my favorite authors' writing styles click in my mind. And I'm slowly and I actually said this in an Instagram post recently where about finishing Lost Children Archive, how I want to make sure that I can go beyond reading what I want to read and authors I want to read from to reading from people that make me actually realize why I bother to create any kind of content. The original line from Christopher Hitchens would have been, why I bother to write, but in this case, as the print journalism major talking into a microphone, yeah. But yeah, and I've kind of hit that same kind of almost bizarro version of that, where it's like, it's not that I want to read less, but it's just that there is so much out there. Mm-hmm. And now it's at the point where it's got to be something that either really pulls me in or something that I'm doing it because a friend or someone I really admire wrote it.
No, right, no. When it comes to, first of all, very elegantly said, eloquently said. When it comes to discovering those new genres, though, it is a very, it's muddy water is what it is. You can't just simply dive headfirst into a specific genre.
Q2, Muddy Waters, and Family Guy with his kidney stone. Anyway, keep going.
It's definitely, muddy water, whirlwind, whatever opaque classification you have of the genre itself, because you're going to get those subgenres and microgenres of, things that you may be interested in at first. You read the first 10 pages and you're just like, wow, this really sucks, or this just really doesn't click with me. And it was kind of interesting kind of segueing into different genres that we never would have expected to really study or go into. I actually recently had a deliberation class the other night, and we had to choose a topic for like our first take briefing. Mm-hmm. And it was centering around an issue that we sort of held dear to us of policy change. Now, everyone chose these lush, extravagant topics such as climate change, immigration, healthcare, legalization of marijuana. You can go to procon.org. There wasn't a single one that wasn't talked about.
Right.
I chose book banning, which is, again, sort of a niche topic, but given my history, given my, I don't want to say expertise in the field, but definitely my interest in the field.
I mean, I don't think you've had a religious leader issue a death order or a death sentence on your life.
Like not yet, not that I know of.
Yeah.
But essentially, my topic was book banning, and the professor loved it because it was just so different. And I don't know if whether or not she just had faith in me, more faith than I ever did, but we had to, defend her point. Obviously, you've been in an argumentation class before.
Yeah.
And I was under the impression I was under the stance, my impression stands, that book banning should not be implemented in places of academic study, consumption, purchase, what have you. Mm-hmm. It should be left to subjective opinion. And, again, you may disagree, audience may disagree, that's fine. What I did that was different, though, was I brought in elements of not only fiction, but also nonfiction of book, like classified as book banning. It doesn't have to inherently refer to, excessive use of violence, promiscuity, or, rampant drug use, excuse me. It can also just deal with, very harsh, heavy topics. And the main argument that I had is that not only does it stigmatize elements of, subjects that are obviously fiction, and I actually held up the books Brave New World and Lord of the Flies. Those are my two favorites.
Okay.
I do like the dystopian sort of setting.
I actually do prefer Brave New World over
No, I do too.
Because I think
I do too.
1984, and granted, like...
Orwell, what it is that...
Which isn't to take away from Orwell.
No.
He was a masterclass.
He was a masterclass
journalist,
But what I'm saying is that when it comes to Orwell versus Huxley, Huxley just has this tone to him. He's very descriptive. Orwell is more the same, but Huxley... God, how do I classify this? He's very meticulous in his speech.
Okay.
And I guess I am too, to the point where, after rereading Brave New World after, 4 years since being a senior in high school, right. I started to notice not only just how long the first chapter was, but really just the very much in-depth nature of how the fertilization room, if you've ever read Brave New World, just occurs, going into how different subsets of classifications of humans, It blew my mind back then. It blows my mind now.
Yeah.
But going into my last point, to segue, was that book banning not only constituted works of fiction, but also works of nonfiction. Okay. And my other example of a quote-unquote banned book, which I found was, I don't want to say incredibly alarming, but just incredibly disconcerting, was Elie Wiesel's Own Night.
Yeah. That one I actually still have not...
Which, of course, if you haven't read it, is...
But I know it's like...
It's one of the most famous Holocaust memoirs of...
Right.
Of the millennium.
Yeah.
And the fact that...
of the century.
Well, of the century.
Yeah.
My bad. The fact that it was not so much banned, but more so just pushed to the side of, hey, this is controversial. But it's history. So how do you justify that, just because it dealt with heavier themes, that lumped it into the same category as things that are considered dangerous, not suited for, readers' eyes.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it was very disconcerting to just... I was sort of at a loss for words about this last night when I covered the topic, and when it comes to things like subjective opinion and artistic expression, it shouldn't be trampled on, especially of something this, seemingly insignificant to some who may not look to reading as a hobby. Yeah. But to people like you and I could definitely care about. Anyway, that was that's my point. It's I'm not sure if you've had any interest in the subject.
I have. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned Salman Rushdie a few moments ago. I read the Satanic Verses. I love the book. I probably now can't go to Iran for saying that now. I wasn't planning on going, but the whole concept of banned books. I mean, and I think that's another interesting thing too, is the fact that with the oversaturation in content now, and given that we don't live in a lot of ways, we don't live very much in the same society that we were in, back in the day when you had, Joseph McCarthy, or back in '89 when you had what happened, the fatwa on Salman Rushdie, or even as recent as roughly a little over a decade ago when you had, the murders of Theo Van Gogh in Europe, or even Charlie Hebdo. I mean, I think we're now living in a world that's far less, not polarizing, but basically like we're at a point now where everything is so polarized, where it's hard to even think of anything being taboo anymore.
Well, that was also the ironic twist that I implemented in my speech last night, whereas something that was written, I want to say, 10, 20 years ago, was incredibly touchy subject matter back then.
Yeah.
Whereas now in the 21st century, we're looking at these very same elements as, being taboo, but given this, you say polarization, I say the opposite, where it's more so just a higher tolerance. Whereas it could be reanalyzed, reinterpreted, and again,
it's also
much more left up to subjective opinion.
Yeah, well, I think it's also like desensitized. Like,
right.
Like you can go to a bookstore now and pick up the Satanic Verses and not have to worry about somebody,
of course,
killing you. Or it was just last year. I didn't get a chance to pick it up, but Edward Snowden's memoir, Permanent Record, came out,
right,
and he was trying to get squashed by the federal government for any kind of money made from the book. And the federal government wasn't going to cease the book's publication, but at the same time, they didn't like the idea that he was profiting off of talking about things that they deemed unclassified, or that they deemed classified, rather, but he wasn't revealing anything new in the book. It was basically just his account of his life since he went public, since he left Hong Kong and gave all that information to Glenn Greenwald at The Guardian, who was then at The Guardian. Now even Glenn Greenwald's going through his own rigmarole with the Brazilian government. It's stupid and ridiculous. I probably now can't go back to Brazil for saying that, but yeah.
Would you want to go back?
A good question for another time. But yeah, no, the subject's always appealed to me. The only thing is like I said, nowadays, something like American Dirt, it's controversial in the sense that it's more to do with the publishing industry and how it looks at things as being successful compared to other things. Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that you can have books that come out that get the New York Times best book of the year stamp of approval, and yet you never hear it within the zeitgeist. It's like, well, is it really something of note? Mm-hmm. I mean, to some degree, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was a trend. I still love those books, but they were a trend from a decade ago. And in this case, to outright say that American Dirt is the Grapes of Wrath for now is bonkers, because there's authors out there that have done even better works. I keep mentioning Valeria Luiselli's book, but there are so many people out there that are covering the issue of immigration and putting it into nonfiction, poetry, novelizations that capture it in a way that's artistically sound, and it's something that I'd like to think I know I found it appealing. I know you haven't read Luiselli's book. I think the paperback's coming out this month. If it hasn't already, I'd recommend it.
Definitely.
Because she has it very fragmented and kind of, it's a through line story, but it is so fractured because it's about a family traveling across the country and they take inventory of their belongings, and she jumps from perspectives from one character to another, and it's written in such a great way while also addressing, David Bowie gets brought up in the book. And I'm going to say this now. I'm going to be talking a lot of David Bowie on this show, so get used to it. But not to spook everybody that for me just planting my flag in the ground. But anyway, and it talks about the Apaches and Geronimo, and, Geronimo's a hero of mine. So there's a lot in the book it was unexpected, but it was also like, damn, this is a lyrical masterpiece, which I think is what I said on Twitter about it. But kind of to get on from that subject, a part of, I think also why we're kind of looking at having this show begin and move forward is just out of the fact that we do kind of see the arts as being in some kind of a crisis, mm-hmm. and being in some kind of danger of over commercialization, and you can have raw talent out there. It's just that because you're not paying to see it, it's almost as if you don't know it even exists.
Right. Now, again, that doesn't help our pitch, ironically, as being, yet another podcast.
I mean, you still need a phone or a Mac to listen, or excuse me, a phone or a computer. We're not sponsored.
No.
A phone or a computer to actually hear us.
Right.
However,
I mean, we don't
have a cable news channel that's going to play a podcast.
Our intent is to not only create that dialogue, but, potentially to create, I'd hope, a little bit of shift in discourse. I'm not saying that you're going to agree with everything I'm going to say, vice versa, or even the audience looking from inside out or outside in. So, I wouldn't be surprised if what further arguments can be delved from it to see what direction it can go from there. Like with the topic of literature. We spent, half hour?
We spent and this was going to technically be another episode where we talk about the status of books. But,
right.
I mean, I think too that's the big issue at hand is that there has to be different ways in order to get messages across, but also to let people know about other creative peoples out there,
right,
without needing it to be through some kind of lens that's a major company or studio or a big publisher even. I mean, for me personally, the publishing outlets that I follow tend to be a little bit smaller, some of them a little more radical, as they claim to be. And they end up producing work that, while admittedly sometimes is a little bit unreadable, sometimes can be exquisite and tremendous to read, especially if we're talking, where we live. I mean, if it's about LA, pick up City of Quartz. If we're talking about immigration, pick up We Built the Wall. There's a lot of great books out there by smaller publishers that probably... Me mentioning those two books probably gives away the publisher I'm talking about, but I mean, it's about making that kind of a space, but also putting it through a medium that I think a lot of people are gravitating to more.
I definitely think people are gravitating more to the podcasting, video hosting, file sharing medium.
Yeah,
where it's not so much. And again, ironic because we just spent the first 30 minutes, but it's not so much textually based anymore.
Yeah.
And whether that be, traditional format, you flip a page, now it's being used on tablets where, that's how you get your news, that's how you get your reading material. Transitioning into what we're doing now, where essentially it's a further dive into the topic itself. Rather than just sitting here reading word for word like an audiobook, we hope to share our interpretations with that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think too, that's just kind of as a character from The Godfather Part 2, who was once quoted by John Lovitz as saying, "This is the business we've chosen." And that's an issue we run into is, we write, we publish our own material, but at the same time, what more can we do with that on our own? And which is a great kind of segue. I mean, we're kind of already there about why podcasting. We're two guys talking about books and the arts, and we're talking about visual media, whereas you're listening to us. And that's not to say in the future there won't be any video.
We plan on it.
At least I'm planning it. I mean, there will be some journalism involved. There's going to be some video. We definitely hope to collaborate with other podcasts in the future. I can already think of one that, I'm very close to. But, it's not 2003 anymore. You can't have a blog. I mean,
I've tried.
Me too.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, having
it's not to say that it's not to say that it isn't a fruitless endeavor. I definitely think that getting your foot wet it's more so when you first have a blog, kind of speaking from personal experience, you get this sense of pride that not only I wrote something, I'm going to have people see it. Which, you know, speaking from the perspective of, God, what was it, 19, 18, sophomore year of college, where I had my first blog post, and it was just this inconsequential drivel about some satire I found funny. I don't know.
Yeah.
It felt good.
Yeah.
Nobody read it, but, and that's just kind of speaking from the heart of right then and there realizing I don't care if I never get paid for doing this. I like doing this. It isn't 2003. I'm glad it isn't 2003 because, my God, did writing all that get tiring.
Well, I mentioned 2003 just because you have a lot of... That was where...
That's when it all... Yeah.
The blog bubble just went berserk.
Exactly.
And you had a lot of people that basically made their careers off of blogging about, like, the Iraq War, and they ended up favoring it. And now they're adding to the discourse of modern-day politics, and they just need to go away.
Right.
And, you know, even those few people that were, you know, maybe they were a little bit misguided for being, you know, they thought they were being cute with their attacks while also supporting John Kerry. Like, they were still on the right path, that a lot of those people that ultimately made a career out of saying, yes, we need to go to war, they were doing the right thing to call those people out. They're still adding to the same minutia now that is just making the discourse even worse and even more unfathomable to listen to. Case in point, the New Hampshire primary. Hashtag Bernie won. No matter how many other people are going to say, well, second place, that's the real winner.
Hey,
Fourth place,
second the best. You know?
You really want to be 11th, because what's better than first? Another one. Like, no, there's none of this. No. But on top of that, too, like, even though there is, I can already hear someone say, oh, well, just adding another podcast is just more saturation. And sure, here's the thing, it's 2020. In any media market, there is oversaturation. In all of them, there is oversaturation. I mean, we don't have the budgets to create our own cable news channel where we can be competitive with the other big three. You know, we can't.
And in a sense, we don't plan to.
Right.
You know,
it's
at least,
also about
at least get it
standing
to
out.
that. At least get it to that point where it's like, you're, top three silently over-combative. Where, personally, I feel, maybe I could speak for both of us, that we don't feel like having that perspective is necessary. Where having this platform, to have a platform, not to, it sounds so cheesy when I say this, but really, like, it's the truth, not putting others down.
Yeah.
And not just stepping all over individuals.
Well, it's about, and this is kind of the point of our show, but it's also something that, as much as this is what the show is about in terms of what you're going to hear, this is also what we're about in terms of what we want to do behind the scenes, which is build our collective even with other podcasts. That being said, I'm more than willing to call out shows that may be, a little bit polluting what's going on out there. There are pods out there that are trying to save us, if you know what I mean. And, it's up for debate. But, yeah, it's about what we're doing. And it's really weird saying behind the scenes, but also in front of the camera, because there's no camera yet. But, yeah, it's what my good friend Kenneth Frank James Barry would say. It's all about coalitions. And that's a joke that I am silently laughing my ass off about. But yeah, and as we go on, we are going to talk more about a lot of different kinds of art forms, and also, talk a little bit about what's going on in the news. Keep y'all updated on that. Yeah, I said y'all. That was a work thing. Good question.
You don't get out much, do you?
It's a good question that won't get answered. I am from the Southland. the Southland.
Not the Bible Belt. South,
no. Oh God, no. I'm from the city of Angels.
City of Angels.
So yeah. Yeah. So if anything, we're kind of giving this show in a lot of ways to you guys, but it's also just a way to let ourselves be heard. And we were talking about this off air beforehand, but this is a show we could see going past the both of us.
I definitely agree. It's in the alpha stages, I would say. Off scene, behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. These conversations were always something that we wanted to take to the next step, and whether it just be that whole back and forth exchange. I saw, I don't know about you, but I saw something in it that could definitely be worthwhile to potentially other listeners.
Yeah. And even other hosts. Like even before we sail off, like it's the lighthouse, right off into the sunset, like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade,
favorite movie.
We hope to have mine too. Yeah. One of my favorites. Yeah. We hope to have other guests and other guests, but also other hosts, hopefully down the road. So, yeah, we're kicking this off. However, we're going to be signing off just because we've reached that time limit that we didn't technically set for ourselves, but it was supposed to be earlier. But that's what happens when you're having too much fun with a microphone in front of you. So with that being said, we're signing off. I guess where can people find us on the socials?
So essentially,
on the twits
that's another
and
thing.
Beyond.
When it comes down to social media, it's actually really simple to look us up. It is Mars on Life Show, if I believe.
Yes. Our Twitter handle is at Mars on Life Show. Same goes with Instagram. We're on both those platforms. In terms of our own social media, you can find me at Mancini RA on Twitter. And I believe I'm Mancini Ryan on Instagram. I mean, just type Ryan Mancini and you'll get my name.
With me, it's more so the same. The at handles, very little variation. So with Twitter, it's at DRSEBBY, Dr. Sebi. I had it in high school, Sume.
You've also got an underscore in there.
That was for my Twitter one. So Instagram was the one without the underscore.
Gotcha.
Twitter is at DR_SEBBY. Again, sue me. It was high school. I was impressionable. But if you just want to get down to the nitty gritty of it, you can just search up my name, Sebastian Shug. If you search up for it in Google, even it's probably the first thing that you'll see, alongside my other publications and collaborations with other individuals. So,
all right. So that's episode 1, everybody. See you later. Bye.
Take care.